Thank you for joining us this evening. You are now attending the webinar entitled Teaching Asian American History, Going Beyond Representation. Our leader for tonight's session is Freda Lynn, co-director of the YURI Education Project. Tonight's TAs are Dan Barish, Baylor University, Waco, Texas, and Angela Lee, Weston High School, Weston, Massachusetts. As I said earlier, I'm honored to have our TAs here. They do a fine job, and they are awesome educators. So it's great to have you in the room. Freda Lynn is the co-director, founder of YURI Education Project. YURI creates educational resources and experiences for cultural institutions, teachers, PK through 12 students, with a specialty in creating curricula on Asian American histories and stories. YURI aims to teach the power of coalition building in order to create understanding across diverse communities. Freda became a history teacher to integrate these and other marginalized stories into schools. Freda taught middle and high school history and leadership in Chicago and San Francisco Bay Area schools for 16 years. After leading the teaching field, she facilitated social movement history tours with Freedom Lifted, consulted with the Center for Asian American Media and UC Berkeley History Social Science Project, and was the education program director of the Fred T. Korematsu Institute. Freda was also a featured teacher in the book, See You When We Get There, Teaching for Change in Urban Schools by Greg Michi. She currently serves on the National Council for History Education Board of Directors. Freda, I am honored to have you here. We look forward to hearing your talk. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Mike. It's really great to be here. Also great to see so many Californians here. I'm also in California. Shout out West Coast. And good to see my partner in business here, Kath. I see her in there, and Cara Lee from the National Council for History Education. So really good to see, and thanks, Angela, for doing all the shout outs on LinkedIn. Great, so let's get started. Yes, how can we teach Asian American history and go beyond representation? So yeah, you've already heard a lot about our business. Kath and I founded YURI Education Project in 2019. I can't believe how long it's been. But yes, 2019, we were former classroom teachers, and we started out by creating curriculum, and it's grown tremendously, especially during COVID, as you can imagine. And so, yeah, we'll talk about more of our work as we go along. And you've already heard an introduction there from Angela, I saw in the chat, about Yuri Kochiyama. That's who we named our business after. She's a lifelong activist. She was incarcerated with her family and more than 120,000 Americans of Japanese ancestry, and she understood the meaning of injustice, and it really helped shape her compassion to lead and work with communities of various backgrounds in struggles for change. And she was all about building coalitions and solidarity with diverse communities and being in struggle with them. And this is why I was so inspired by her and wanted to name the business after her, along with Kath. Okay. So a little bit more about me. Yes, you heard that I was a teacher. I was a history teacher for 16 years. I was in the Chicago area teaching high school. And then when I moved to San Francisco, I taught in the Bay Area for another 8 years in middle school. I also taught leadership and just have been in a variety of different schools. And how I became passionate about teaching Asian American history really began as an undergrad. And I write more details about this experience in the article that I saw Angela post. Thank you, Angela. Why Teach Asian American History? And it's on PBS Education. And by the way, if you want a copy of my slides, I'll have links to all the resources I'm going to share with you. So yeah, you can definitely get that. And I'll tell you how to get the slides at the end. Okay, so going back to my roots. Yes, so this is a picture of me senior year. at one of our rallies for Asian American Studies. And it really started with me going to college, not really knowing much about my identity. I mean, this is where I came into my Asian American identity. And this was in the 90s. This is also where I learned about Yuri Kochiyama, because while we were hunger striking for Asian American Studies, because there were not even any classes there, she wrote a letter of support to us. And that's how I learned about her. Yeah, and just in terms of my background, I mean, I grew up conflicted about my racial identity throughout my youth. I grew up on Long Island, a very white suburb, very conservative. I didn't even know what the word race was. I don't think they ever mentioned it in school. This is in the 80s. I didn't know that it was racist when kids would do the whole ching chong with their, the eyes, moving them up and down, slanting their eyes up and down, calling me chink or whatever. And yeah, so that came from that environment, and all I wanted to do was assimilate, so I wasn't different. And of course, like so many Asian Americans, you go to college, you get to know from interacting with students there. I got to attend student organized seminars on Asian American history. I was involved in organizations, and then that's how I learned about, I'm sure many of you know about Who Killed Vincent Chin, this amazing documentary about probably the most famous anti-Asian hate crime, as I'm sure many of you have heard about during COVID, because there were so many connections to it. And when I learned about his murder, it just really galvanized me to work to promote awareness of Asian Americans. And then I went to the Association for Asian American Studies conference as a student, and I learned about this entire field of Asian American studies that's been around since the 60s. And, I was in school in the 90s. I'm like, why aren't there any courses here? What's going on? I was very outraged, and that's what led me to start this movement. And then it just motivated me to become a teacher, because I'm like, I should have learned this when I was in my lonely suburb on Long Island. Like, everyone should be learning about Asian American history. It's important. And in terms of my own identity development, it would have helped me tremendously. So that's just a little bit about me. So I want to tell you about our work, and these are some highlights. We do professional learning for, we do our own independent professional learning workshops, and we also do customized work for clients like you see here for the Smithsonian. This is for the Asian Pacific American Center specifically. We presented at the summit to talk about a co-creation project we've been working on for the past 2 years. We also do advising from time to time, and Kath helped advise with the Sesame Street workshop, actually, for the new Korean American character, Ji Young, who is awesome. She plays guitar here, and that's another thing we do. And then curriculum development, we create our own curriculum, and we also do a lot of customized curriculum for cultural institutions, filmmakers, writers. This one here is a graphic novel that we wrote an education guide to go along with it. And yeah, so that's what we mainly do. And this was in the resources, the recommended resources on that list: Hidden Voices, Asian American and Pacific Islander History in U.S. And this is done through the New York City Department of Education. And it's a really wonderful resource. I tell everybody to use it. It's really the only, it's like a mini textbook of Asian American history. And there's so much amazing history there, profiles of people, different time periods, to really give you ideas on how to bring this to your students. You can print them out and have your students read them. You can scaffold them, of course, for younger learners. So this is really meant for students to use. And there'll be a companion guide coming out to show teachers how to use this. This is a project that Kath and I worked on 2 years ago, and this was just released last year. So the next, wanted to also show you about this Co-Create initiative. which is with the Smithsonian Asian Pacific American Center. And this is professional learning example that we did. We did a 4-day convening where we brought together community organizations, educators, to create educational resources about their local stories. So this can be found on their website, and it's really amazing because there's so many localized stories that you would never know about unless you really talk to the people living in these areas. Okay, great. So that's just some of our work, and I would love to hear about your own schooling. As you can imagine, or well, I kind of told you, I didn't learn anything about Asian Americans at all in my PK3 through 12 schooling. So I would love to see what you learned about Asian Americans. So it's something that Kath and I love to hear from people. So go ahead and put that in the chat. Okay, well, I'm not really seeing much, so I'm just going to move on. But yes, thank you.
Yeah.
Japanese internment camps, yes.
And yeah, Freda, sometimes it takes the chat a few seconds to catch up.
Oh, okay.
And
I
then
just didn't want to pause.
Yeah, and then it starts moving really quickly.
Yes, Chinese yeah, I know. And then all of a sudden I'm like, oh my God, I can't read it. Yes. Okay, so this is exactly what I was hoping to see. Chinese Exclusion Act and Japanese American internment is usually, yep, not much. Wow. I don't know why. I thought in LA, the LA people would have more. Well, that's okay. I can't read that fast. But anyway, yes, I did see Chinese New Year. And yes, this is basically, unfortunately, a majority, like the main way that Asian Americans are represented in schools once or twice a year through these various holidays, Asian American Heritage Month in May. So yeah, this is the representation part, right? Like let's just put some Asian Americans in there and we're done. So hopefully we can change that. And then there's been a lot of educational research by these academic researchers talking about doing the research on how Asian Americans have been included and represented in curriculum since the 1970s. There's been this research. So in PK3 through 12 curriculum, and many of these studies analyze history textbooks, literary programs that are widely adopted by school districts, and it basically reveals that students in American schools are receiving a very narrow version of Asian American history, as you can imagine, which leads to the othering of Asian Americans and seeing them as a monolithic group, which of course gets us to this idea of the perpetual or forever foreigner, as you may have heard about, which is definitely one of the ways that Asian Americans have been seen as a monolithic group. When they're seen as threats, and it's related to this stereotype. And as Erica Lee, this amazing historian, Asian American historian, states, they are linked to the U.S.'s shifting relationships with various Asian countries, and therefore they're otherized. And of course, the most recent example of Asian Americans being seen as perpetual foreigners is during COVID, when attacks against Asian Americans skyrocketed. So another way that Asian Americans have been seen as a monolith is through the model minority myth. And this is a stereotype of Asian Americans being smart and hardworking, that they're more successful economically and educationally than other ethnic and racial groups. And so this does a lot of damage when you see Asian Americans only in these ways, obviously, because then you don't see the tremendous diversity and the other issues that Asian Americans have gone through, contributions, et cetera, et cetera. And also, just through some research that, again, professors have done, is that state standards basically show the Chinese Exclusion Act in 1882, as a lot of you said, Japanese American incarceration. So that might be in some state standards. There are only 10 states that require Japanese American incarceration to be taught. So there's a lot of work to be done. And currently there's this really great research done by Professor Soyan An, whose talk goes more into depth about curriculum standards. She's found that 54% of the content is usually showing them as foreigners or an economic threat, and 33% as new arrivals to the US. So that research can be found online as well. Okay, so let's talk about what we mean by Asian America, because it's a term that covers a huge amount, as you all know, because Asia is a huge continent, as you can see. So yeah, there's a lot of different people covered here, over 30 nationalities, over 100 languages spoken, different ethnic groups, etc. And this is from the United States Census Bureau, which shows the various Asian ethnic groups in the US. So there's quite a bit. The top 5 are Chinese, Asian, Indian, Filipino, and Vietnamese, and Korean. So lots of different Asian ethnic groups in the US. Okay. And the Asian American umbrella covers a hugely diverse array of ethnicities, of course. And just to kind of talk about that a little bit, it can hide the different experiences that you just saw on the previous slide when you just say Asian America, because there's just so much diversity within that. But then at the same time, Asian American was created as an umbrella term to basically give people in this group more political agency, particularly for civil rights, and it continues to do so today, which is shown here with the White House initiative on Asian Americans, Native Hawaiians, and Pacific Islanders. So this hasn't been in the White House, in the executive branch, during every presidential time, but it is there now, and there are many people who represent these groups to talk about various issues that Asian Americans, Native Hawaiians, and Pacific Islanders need. And these are the groups that are usually put together, and that's why you do see this acronym AAPI. You've seen that probably the most. That they can also, people have also used the acronym of AANHPI or AA and NHPI, and I'm sure there's a whole bunch more of the alphabet soup. But just to kind of give you an idea that there's an even larger umbrella in which Asian Americans are part of. And just to kind of talk about Pacific Islanders and Native Hawaiians, the reason why they're separated out is because they're an indigenous group of people. They're very distinctly different. There are different studies, like on oceanic studies, that talk more about indigeneity, and these are their ancestral roots in the Pacific Ocean world. And just to kind of give you an idea, these are the Pacific Islanders in the US and their populations. So there's that. Yeah, so let's talk about how we can go beyond representation when teaching about Asian Americans. So one thing is to challenge the dominant discourses that we already see in schools. For example, one that some schools may teach about is who initiated and led the Great Boycott in the 1960s. And I would love for anyone to put in the chat if you have any ideas. So go ahead and do that. And most people would say Cesar Chavez, but actually it was a Filipino named Larry Itliong, and there were a bunch of other Filipino leaders who initiated the idea of the Great Boycott, and then they brought it over to the Mexican Americans and said, hey, we need to fight for more rights for farm workers in California. So another way that we can go beyond representation is to complicate the narrative. So go ahead and put your ideas in the chat for this. What court case segregated people of color? course, there's the one that we usually hear about. Would love to hear if you know of any other court cases. Most people would say Plessy versus Ferguson. That's what I had to teach as a history teacher. There's Asian Americans, of course, as you know that I'm going to go there, were also segregated. This was actually the first court case to challenge segregation in schools. And some of you may have heard of this. This happened in San Francisco and actually 10 years before Plessy versus Ferguson. And the Tate family tried to enroll their daughter Mamie at Spring Valley, but the San Francisco School Board officially denied her entry into the school, citing education codes that allowed schools to exclude children who had, quote, filthy or vicious habits, or children with contagious or infectious diseases. It's pretty terrible. And Mamie's mother, Mary, wrote a letter of protest and sued the board, stating that Mamie was a natural-born citizen and had the right to a free education like other American citizens. They did win the case, but unfortunately, San Francisco created segregated Chinese schools in Chinatown instead of letting her attend the original school she wanted to attend, called Spring Valley. So that was the first case that challenged segregation. You also have Lum versus Rice, which was based in Mississippi. The same idea of a Chinese American girl, Martha Lum. She tried to enroll in a Mississippi school. She was denied. Her father sued, but he lost. And this was a U.S. Supreme Court case. The Tate versus Hurley was a California Supreme Court case. I don't know if I made that clear. But basically, Lum versus Rice affirmed Plessy versus Ferguson, that yes, indeed, separate but equal is okay. So just a little bit of history about how to talk about what we always talk about, which is, segregation in the South. There's a more complex way to talk about it. And I even remember as a teacher, when I would talk about Jim Crow, I had Asian American students ask me, what about Asian Americans? Like, where would they go? What would they do? And I honestly, at the time, because this was, more than 10 years ago at this point, I did not have an answer because I didn't know. And I wish I had known this information. So anyway, another thing that we believe in is, of course, building solidarity is a way to help tell Asian American stories in a more complex way in schools. And we've been talking about that a lot, like what coalitions have Asian Americans fostered in history. So go ahead and put that in the chat, whatever you know about. Obviously, Yuri Kochiyama is in there, and I will show something about her. This is also a pretty famous photo in this great book called Chains of Babylon, talking about how Asian Americans supported the Black Power movement in the San Francisco Bay Area. They often lived in similar segregated neighborhoods, and this is how coalitions formed. And this is them, Asian Americans supporting the Free Huey movement. And really, like a lot of Asian Americans, this is during the 1960s, a lot of Asian Americans' racial consciousness and political activism was deeply influenced by Black civil rights movement, by the Black civil rights movement and the Black Power movement. And so a lot of them worked in solidarity with the Black Panthers, for example, in the San Francisco Bay Area, particularly disaffected Chinese American youth in San Francisco Chinatown. And there's more examples of this, and this book really goes into more detail about it. So here is this wonderful mural of Yuri Kochiyama with Malcolm X, because, as I said, she did a lot of coalition building with a variety of different communities, the Puerto Rican community, Asian Americans, Japanese Americans, the Black Power movement, and she was deeply influenced by Malcolm X when she met him in Harlem, New York City. And this mural still stands today, and it's a way of showing their friendship for one another. And yeah, they used to send postcards back and forth. She's also, if you've ever seen the Life magazine cover of the assassination of Malcolm X, the Asian American woman in the photo is YURI. She's the one that's holding his head. So that's the way I usually tell people about who she is, and a lot of people don't know who that Asian American woman is. So yeah, as you can gather, there's a lot of complexity in teaching Asian American studies, and I wanted to give you some ideas on how we can break this down a little bit, because it's a lot. It's over 400 years of history, so where can you start? And there's this great book called Keywords for Asian American Studies, and written by scholars of Asian American studies all across the U.S. And there's a variety of themes here. As you can see, there are many, many themes. I think there's 67 or something. I can't see my own numbers. So there's a lot. And we're going to take a look at a few of them today. We're going to look at these. I'm just going to pull some quotes from there and then have us think about the quotes, what they mean, and then I will show you some of the history or examples of how you can teach about these themes. So for each quote that I show you, go ahead and answer the following in the chat. What words or ideas stand out to you and why? Okay, so the first one we're going to look at is identity. And this chapter is actually in the resources. Professor Ho was very generous to give us a copy of this chapter, so that PDF is in the resources. And so I pulled this quote. I think this really summarizes a lot of it, of the chapter. Identity is a term that simultaneously unites and divides Asian Americans. Those with Asian ancestry in the United States are united in this demographic label through the political reality of the history of racialization and by activist and academic beliefs in making visible the experiences and history, I'm reading the chat, of Asian Americans within the larger U.S. society. They're divided by the different types of identities that exceed the singular racial label. Yes, for definitely unites and divides stands out to me a lot too, for sure. So I'm going to talk about how this identity started, the roots of Asian American identity, and this is how it united people of Asian descent in the United States, because that term didn't always exist. And it really began in the 60s with the largest student strike in history, the ethnic studies strike at San Francisco State College in 1968 to 69. The Black Students Union and the Third World Liberation Front, which was a multiracial coalition of students, including Asian American, Latinx, and Native American student organizations, demanded for a more inclusive curriculum taught by people of color. And during this time, UC Berkeley grad students were forming their own organization as activists. Yuji Ichioka and Emma Gee, they coined the term Asian American as a way to help activists gain more visibility. And this term stuck, and it broadened out as a way to really unite Asian Americans together for civil rights and political agency. Okay. So in terms of identity, the way that we can be united and divided in some way, this is why this organization, AAPI Data, was founded. And it's really great because it helps disaggregate data to really show the distinct quality, the parts of each Asian ethnic group, their experiences, because of course, and I do see this question, so I hope I'm helping to unpack this a bit, because it is pretty complicated. I mean, not all Asian Americans are the wealthiest people in the U.S., and when you disaggregate the data, you can see this, and I'll show you an example on the next slide. But AAPI Data, they work with the White House Initiative, so it's really great that they're helping to break down this data more. And in fact, this article is really interesting because it shows that Asian Americans are the largest segment, that's the fastest growing part of the electorate. So that's really interesting. And it also makes me wonder, why is the news not talking about it more? Because I never hear about what Asian Americans are doing in terms of voting, but I know I'm voting. I know a lot of Asian Americans are voting. But anyway, so here is part of the data that the AAPI data created for the White House initiative. And it shows you the poverty rate here, that basically 1 out of 10 Asian Americans live in poverty. Even in San Francisco, there are SROs. I've seen this in the news with, families living in like 150 square foot apartments. I mean, it's terrible. So, and then you can see here that the ethnicities that are most represented in terms of poverty are Bangladeshi, Mongolian, Burmese, Samoan, and Marshallese in terms of Pacific Islanders. So it just shows you that there's diversity within the Asian American community in very vast ways. And there's so much more that we could talk about, but that's just one snapshot of the Asian American community. So the next quote, the next theme I wanted to pull up is assimilation. So go ahead and put in the chat what words or ideas stand out to you and why. What are Asian Americans assimilating into, and what is the intent of assimilation? Is it being used as a tool of power? Sociologist W.E.B. Du Bois, who was also a historian and civil rights activist in the late 1800s and early 1900s, argued that racial difference is not a problem that needs to be assimilated into something else, and that assimilation efforts are normative measures to center whiteness as the national identity. Yes, I see some great, tool of power, Americanize, yes. So this was written by Lisa Sunhee Park. And in terms of resources, this is a really wonderful poem that spoke to me as a student. I found this book, The Bridge Called My Back, and this poem really rocked my world when I read it, because I was just like, this is what I went through, and I didn't know it wasn't just me. It's called When I Was Growing Up by Nellie Wong. And, it just talks about wanting to be as white as possible and wanting to blend in. And so it really showed me how to name that. And so not only is assimilation about what we've internalized as Asian Americans, or what Asian Americans like me may have internalized, but it was also encouraged by the government. Similar to Indian boarding schools, but not quite as drastic. But the U.S. government was involved in this in terms of Japanese Americans, in terms of a photo campaign to promote the assimilation of incarcerated Japanese Americans during World War II. So they would have photos like this to really encourage them to, join the Girl Scouts, Boy Scouts, etc., to not live in little Tokyos, to blend into society as much as possible. Outside of the West Coast, that's why a lot of Japanese American communities developed in Chicago, Philadelphia, all across the U.S. So that's a big reason why there are a lot of Japanese Americans outside of the West Coast, was because of this assimilation plan or campaign. So another quote is empire. So go ahead and put in the chat some words that stand out to you. The motive forces behind Asian migrations to the U.S. emanated not only from discrete push and pull factors, but from uneven world capitalist development. A system of migrant labor extended across the Pacific, facilitated essentially by European and American imperialism in Asia, and demand for cheap labor in the U.S. West and Hawaii. Okay, so yes, cheap labor, capitalist, uneven, great. Yes, and for me, definitely push and pull factors stand out to me, because I feel that that is how Asian Americans are usually talked about, is like this great immigration wave. They're all coming here to find a better life, and some of them were, like my parents. and that's how I first started teaching about Asian Americans, because I didn't know about the empire aspects, and I wish I did when I was teaching, so I could have taught about what I'm about to tell you. So basically, it's related to Spanish colonial empire during the so-called Age of Exploration. And during this time, Spain sent many sea captains and navigators around the world to gain wealth from other lands. Of course, many of us know about Latin America with Cortez and Pizarro, but they were also all over Asia, and they were in the Philippines specifically. And so this map just shows you all the direct connections of their trade routes from the areas they colonized in Asia and the Americas, and how they brought everything back to Spain. And the Philippines basically became their major base in Asia to bring all sorts of goods and labor there in the Philippines, and then ship them across to wherever they needed them. So many Asians, particularly from the Philippines, China, and India, were recruited for labor purposes, and some of them were actually even forced into this labor. And they used their colony in the Philippines to transport Asian laborers around the world to do the work that they needed to work at. So they brought them over to Mexico. And just to show you, these were the galleons, the large ships that were between 78 to 174 feet long. And it took 6 months to get from Manila in the Philippines to Acapulco, Mexico, their home base in Latin America. And so, the conditions were pretty bad, pretty dirty, unsanitary, not properly equipped for travel. So through this trade with these gigantic ships, there were 40,000 to 100,000 Asians from those parts, China, Japan, South Asia, the Philippines, and other parts of Southeast Asia, that migrated to the Americas as crew members, servants, and some of them were enslaved. So mostly Filipinos and Chinese were recruited as crew members for their navigational and sailing skills. And the first landing of Filipinos in the U.S. was here in Morro Bay, and that's a placard on the right. So if you go to Morro Bay in California, you can see a historical landmark that was placed there by the Filipino National American Filipino Historical Society. Sorry, I'm having trouble with the exact acronym, but the Filipino American Historical Society did this in the 1990s, and there's a landmark there to talk more about this history. And some of them, so that's the first landing of where Filipinos actually went in the U.S. But there were also many that escaped these horrible conditions on the ships and settled in parts of the Americas. And one for sure that has been documented is in Louisiana, in St. Malo, Louisiana, this fishing community that they created in the 1800s. So yeah, they're spread out all through the U.S. That's why I'm sure there's some sort of ancestry from there in Louisiana that's connected to the Civil War, because there were Filipinos that fought in the Civil War. So a lot of this history that just isn't there for us to teach, but there's just so much. Okay, so the next theme is exclusion. And here is a quote from Greg Robinson. To understand Asian exclusion, it is necessary to look at the larger history of ethnic stratification in the United States. From the time of their first settlement, Euro-Americans determined that America was theirs by right, an ever-expanding white man's country that they did not mean to share with other inhabitants. Asian exclusion had a particular nature and operation, one that stemmed from both the timing of large-scale Asian immigration and the particular region of their settlement. Yes, ethnic stratification definitely is something that I noticed as well in the quote. Yeah, so let me get into it. I have some examples. Of course, the Chinese Exclusion Act, which we most know about. And just to give a little bit more detail into this, and a lot of these resources are in the Asian Americans documentary that I recommended on the resources. I highly recommend to watch that, and there's clips that you can use with your students. It's really great. And basically, the anti-Chinese movement during the 1880s, the late 1800s, it really reached its height in the 1880s, and it was due to this economic depression in the 1870s. And it continued into the 20th century, the early 20th century, and that's what led to this law. And it basically was the first in a series of laws that limited immigration based on race. So this is the first time this is all happening, is through the Chinese Exclusion Act, and that's why other Asians were excluded, denied rights, discriminated against. So this affected like Japanese Americans, Indian Americans. They couldn't. There were laws that were created that prevented them from owning land, from becoming citizens, etc. And basically, it also forced them to carry ID with them to prove that they belonged in the U.S. So this is kind of known as the first law for undocumented immigrants, if you will, like the Papers, Please laws that you may have heard about in Arizona, where you have to carry your papers to prove that you're allowed to be there. And this even applied to famous celebrities like this one pictured here, Anna May Wong, if you've heard of her. She's the first Chinese-American Hollywood movie star and producer, and she had to carry this identity card. And this resource is also available, and I can share that with you. So other groups that were excluded were Indians in the U.S., and this is a newspaper article calling Indians a dusky peril. So you may have heard of yellow peril, but they also had something called a dusky peril. And this is a quote here from the article. "This is enough to frighten any community where it is essential that white labor should prevail to ensure continuous industrial and commercial advancement." And this great resource is from the South Asian American Digital Archive, the SADA. They have a lot of great primary resources, so highly recommend for you to check that out. And this, of course, led to a lot of violence against Indian Americans, where people were actually forced out of towns that they lived in. Court cases and laws were also created to discriminate against them as well. And then the one that many of us know in terms of exclusion is the Japanese American incarceration during World War II. And, basically it was a way of excluding them according to region, like that quote was mentioning, because Japanese Americans in the western states of the U.S., as many of you may know, in LA, were forcibly removed to be imprisoned in these camps, these incarceration camps, because they were seen as potential spies and enemies. They were racially profiled. It was all unconstitutional. Nobody was ever proven to be a spy or treasonous. Okay, so that's exclusion, some examples. And another theme, I think, that would be a great way to include Asian American history is through resistance. So go ahead again to put some quotes in there from any words that stand out to you for resistance. And I think for me, the words that stand out for me is most narratives about the social movements of the 1960s and 70s continue to use the black-white framework and obliterate Asian American contributions. And so that is why I'm going to show you many examples of that, one which we've already talked about. So here is a great resource, again, from the Asian Americans documentary clip on the Filipino and Mexican farm workers movement. Another one that's lesser known that we recently worked on with the filmmakers of Free Chul Suli, which just won an Emmy for historical documentary, by the way. It's about people who stood up to free Chul Suli from his incarceration. He was sentenced to life in prison for a crime he did not commit in San Francisco, actually, and this was in 1973. And basically, Asian Americans across generations and ethnicities fought to free Chul Suli, and he was finally released 10 years later. And so it's a really amazing film. If you want to see clips from it, the resource there on PBS Learning Media has that. If you have the PBS app, I believe you can still watch that as well. The full documentary. It's a very moving film for sure, just to talk about the impact of incarceration on someone, the Korean American community, and how they came together across generations to fight for Free Chul Suli's release and freedom, and how a lot of Asian Americans in college became activated because of this. So this was right before another movement that you may have heard about, which is the Justice for Vincent Chin campaign. And it's really known as the birth of a national civil rights movement for Asian Americans. And that began in 1983. So as I mentioned earlier about my own experience being moved by the film Who Killed Vincent Chin, he was a victim of a hate crime. He was murdered by 2 white auto workers in Detroit. They had scapegoated Japanese auto companies, again, the abroad effect, the perpetual foreigner effect, for losing their jobs. These 2 auto workers lost their jobs. They happened to see Vincent Chin at a bar and decided to taunt him, and one thing led to another, and he was killed very violently. And Vincent was not Japanese anyway. I mean, he was Chinese American, not that that mattered. Still an anti-Asian hate crime. And the murderers were not given any jail time at all. So you can imagine why this became such a huge movement. It was a grassroots movement. It spread across the U.S., cross-racially, cross-ethnically, across all backgrounds. It began with people in Detroit, and it also was centered on this new Pan-Asian organization, American Citizens for Justice. If you've ever heard of Helen Zia, she was a huge part of that, one of the founders of that organization. So there are resources as well to tell this story. This is also another project that we worked on to create curriculum around. So that link is there as well. And of course, this is very related to, as I've been mentioning, to the COVID anti-Asian racism and all of the activism that has happened nationally. It was amazing to see how so many people came out for it. I still remember seeing Rihanna on the news, marching on the streets in New York City. So a huge movement. And so it just continues today. And that's a great way to kind of bring the history into the present and connect it together. So yeah, these are the 5 themes. I can't believe I got through all of this as quickly as I have. And I would love to hear any ideas that you might have from these 5 themes or anything that was mentioned today about how you might want to integrate these themes and topics into your existing curriculum. Like, what could you see yourself doing? I know for me, with the empire topic and the Filipinos that first came here, I could have definitely used it in this unit that I would do all the time called Peopling of North America, where I would talk about Native Americans were the first peoples. You had Vikings, you had Russian explorers, of course, the English that came later, the Spanish, slavery, etc. And I really wanted to find Asian Americans. I knew that there had to be something, and I didn't know about the Filipinos that landed in Morro Bay. So I would integrate that for sure in that unit, which I always teach at the beginning of my U.S. history course. Um, yeah, any other ideas? Would love for you all to chat about it. Yes, the social movement for sure. I would do that as well. Um, yeah, California history in the fourth grade for sure. There's so much to talk about. Yeah. Yes, Asian American segregation during Reconstruction. That's for sure. And Jim Crow. I would definitely have done that as well. Yeah, and elementary is something that is I'm feeling very passionate about right now. I did not teach elementary school, but I've worked with a lot of elementary school teachers, and I've seen some amazing work done. There are some resources out there. It's just about digging and figuring out how to scaffold for your students. But I wish there were more like readily available resources. And also I know that teaching history is not a priority for a lot of elementary schools. So that's an issue as well. Even in San Francisco, I've met teachers who don't really know how to teach history. So I'm really hoping that we'll create more resources for elementary schools because it's so important to learn that when you're young. Yeah, so I'm so excited by this chat. There's just so much going on here. I did want to share with you the QR code that I made here. If you want to get the slides, just go ahead and sign up, and I'm happy to send that to you with all those resources. And yeah, Mike, I didn't know if you wanted to pause for a moment.
No problem. Absolutely. We have a few questions that I wanted to send your way.
Okay.
And I will start with Patricia's question. And you touched on this a little bit already, so we'll see if you can maybe expand. I like to use multimedia and entertainment to support lessons for my students. Is there a series, a movie you feel does a decent job at showcasing some of the issues and the beauty of Asian culture?
Well, if you're talking about history, I think the Asian Americans documentary that I mentioned is really, really important, and it goes into so many different communities and throughout different histories. So I would highly recommend that. Um, yeah, I mean, if you could get a little more specific, I could think of something else. But I know I did highlight a lot of films too in the
Yeah,
slides.
absolutely, absolutely. And yeah, Patricia, if you have any specifics that you would like to pass along, please feel free to share them. Alex's question is, I like how you were honest of not knowing how to answer your students' question about what about Asians. I feel
Mm,
the same when trying to celebrate in our school about Filipino heritage. More importantly, how can we relate this information to a predominantly non-Asian community? And again, you
mm,
addressed some of these questions.
yeah.
I wanted to pass them along as well to see if there's any additional thoughts on them.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's it is to kind of like with some of the ideas I've seen in the chat about just putting it within the history that we already know. Like everyone knows about Columbus, but do you know about and the Age of Exploration? But did you know that Spain went to the Philippines and then brought a bunch of Filipinos over and a lot of other Asian groups, and that's how the U.S. was populated. I think that a lot of the U.S. history we teach, I know it was always centered on the 13 colonies when I taught. But, we're here in California, we're here on the West Coast. A lot of history came from Latin America, came from Spain. So I think just showing stories like that within civil rights movements, that people were fighting for basic rights for like farm workers, like violence, like people get, murdered for hate crimes. I think those are all like universal American things to learn about within, our history curriculum. and just to show where Asian Americans are in that curriculum. Because I know I always tried to fit it in where I could, but it was so hard as a teacher, as you all know, dealing with the usual everyday thing and planning the lesson and parents, students, administrators, etc. And then while having to research, because it's not in the textbook, and then creating a lesson around it. So it was quite challenging. Which is why this kind of leads me to my next slide. I recently led this teacher collaborative with Bay Area counties because as a lot of the LA teachers know, there's an ethnic studies requirement. I know ethnic studies is of interest to teachers across the nation as well. And I worked with a group of teachers. We had several online sessions, and I had some one-on-ones to talk about, okay, like what are ways that we can get this into your curriculum and do it through an ethnic studies lens. And we created lesson plans together. We had some templates to help them really like think through this and provided resources. So yeah, I'm going to launch. I worked through with the Bay Area counties to do that, and I want to open that up to independently through YURI for any teacher or school district that's interested in finding ways to put this history really integrated into the curriculum. So it's for all students to know. It should all just naturally flow in our curriculum. Like when we teach about World War II, World War I, imperialism, Asian Americans should show up somewhere because they are often there. And it's just about knowing where, how, through themes. I know I did a lot of thematic teaching. Yeah. So yeah, if you want to join, this is a different QR code. It will lead you to basically my contact information. So we'd love to hear from you if you are interested or if you think your school might be interested. We're going to launch this in the spring. Yeah. Any other questions, Mike? I hope I answered that.
Absolutely. Actually, to the movie question, Ryan, who I want to give a shout out to Ryan as well. Ryan has had some really thought-provoking questions and comments in the chat, and just thanks for being here tonight. He mentions the Joy Luck Club, and I actually dropped this in the presenter discussion because the chat was moving so quickly. I taught it once years ago, and the Chinese students in my class panned it heavily, saying it was inauthentic. As someone who is not Chinese, I would like to know more folks here today. What is your view of this book? And so he dropped that in the chat, and I see everyone's responding to it. But it's really interesting how his students responded to it. So Ryan, I will say that you dropped that question in the right place because there are 874 people who are in the chat tonight, and I'm pretty sure they will get you the responses to it. So thank you for that as well.
I love Angela's comment about that too, because the Joy Luck Club. Yeah, I grew up being able to read it as well. I was like, oh wow, an Asian American author. And I can see why, because it's an older book that students would be like, I don't know what this is. But it's really interesting because Kath and I just worked on a resource with Amy Tan. There's a documentary, and I can't remember the name of it, but it's on PBS Learning Media where there are clips from this document. It's also on Netflix. I don't know if it's still there, this documentary about Amy Tan and her relationship with her mother in particular. And writing and so on and so forth. So it's a really interesting way to kind of talk about the Joy Luck Club as well as Amy Tan's own experience, the complicated relationship she had with her mother and how she integrated some of her own experiences as a child into the Joy Luck Club. So that's all on PBS Learning Media. And I'm sure if you put in Amy Tan in the search, you can find it. It's based on her memoir. That's good. There's people who know what I'm talking about.
Yeah, I believe so. I believe it's Amy Tan Unintended Memoir, I believe.
Yeah, thank you, Kath. I'm so glad Kath is here.
Shout out to Kath. We see you there. here's a question that was placed in the chat a little bit earlier.
Uh-huh.
Several resources for today's discussion speak of an Asian American epistemology. I always stumble on that. Does this phrase refer to a uniquely or characteristic Asian American mode or framework of understanding, a lens through which Asian American experiences and narratives can or should be understood, or a synthesis of the two? Could you please say more about Asian American epistemology? And he's referring to he mentioned several of the resources. The pre-readings make reference to it. He wanted to know, can you speak more about that?
Yeah, I think I'm going to go back to one of my slides, because if you, about the education researchers who've been looking into how Asian Americans have been included in curriculum. Here it is. Nicholas Hartlep. He talks about the book is called Asian/American Curricular Epistemicide, from being excluded to becoming a model minority. So yes, I think there's a specific way in which researchers have looked at how Asian Americans have been included in curriculum. That it's about, this idea of including them as these like outsiders, these threats, these foreigners, and then they were gradually seen as kind of this model minority in some aspects of the curriculum, and that they're super successful. But where is that in between? And I think that's the argument that they try and make in this book. So that's what it's referring to. Yeah.
Okay, good deal. Thank you for that. And Patricia had a question about any media that's more entertainment as opposed to nonfiction and documentaries. And Patricia, I will say as well, they are in the chat. There are several links that have been dropped throughout the evening.
Yeah,
Yeah. Angela has done a great job. Angela, who's on our Teacher Advisory Council, but also TA tonight. So I'd invite you to scroll up the audience chat, and you will see a number there as well. So those are the questions that we have for now. Yeah, those are all the questions that we have now. So
yeah, and I also wanted to just kind of do this to show you all that if you want Kath and I to bring any workshops to your school, we're happy to do that as well, and we can customize according to your own needs. I know Kath is out on the East Coast in New York, so she's gone to New Jersey and done a number of workshops there. So just wanted to let you know about that. And I hope this was helpful. I know there's a lot to wade through, and it would be so much easier if it was just in the textbook there for us already. So I'm really appreciative that you're all here wanting to learn this and to bring it into your curriculum. So.
Good deal. Well, thank you so very much. We have enjoyed this time. Earlier, during my introduction, I mentioned the National Council for History Education. Last year in Cleveland, I had a chance to talk with Freda and extend a verbal invitation, actually last March, to be here tonight.
Yeah.
She graciously accepted. And we're here, and I would invite you all to check out the on-demand version of this particular talk. It will be available to you. Angela mentioned that she has a list of links or a document she is compiling based on the conversation in the chat this evening. And so,
awesome.
Angela, if you pass that along to me, I will make sure that we add it to our webinar resources, so that everyone who's here tonight can go back in and actually put those in as well. And Dan Barish, who is here as well. If you have any additional links, Dan, that you would like to share in that document, we can make sure that they are available for everyone who is here tonight. But as always, we are truly appreciative of you all. Really appreciative of this audience chat. And your responsiveness to our speaker. I have to say that just and your questions, the answers that were provided, Frida. We just really enjoyed it, and
Oh,
we look
great.
forward to hearing more about the work that you all are doing. And again, I invite you all to continue to follow the Your Education Project, the work that Frida and Kath are doing. And Frida, you mentioned that Kathleen, she is here on the East Coast. She's,
Yes.
I wasn't aware of that.
Yeah, she's yeah, we both met. I mean, yeah, I wanted to talk more about them, and I guess we have time. We both met when I was at the Korematsu Institute, and we were on our way to a pilgrimage to Tule Lake, which is on the border of Oregon and California. It was where the segregation center was for Japanese Americans that they thought were, not very cooperative and too, resisting too much. So we met on the bus. We just hit it off in terms of being former teachers and being excited to bring Asian American stories into curriculum writing. She teaches pre-service teachers at CUNY, City University of New York. So yeah, she does tremendous research work as well. So yeah, she's on the East Coast, but we keep our business together through Zoom.
Well, good deal. I have a question for you, and I'm a former history teacher. And again, we have 800 plus teachers, history teachers who are here. What advice would you give for them? We encourage you all to stay in the classroom and continue to pour into your students daily. But for those teachers who are dedicating their work to these causes in a way that you have, do you have any recommendations for those who want to step out and actually get into this work? What encouraged you to step out on faith and actually begin the YURI Education Project? You spoke to it a little bit earlier, but what gave you the hope that this would become something that will continually impact the lives of teachers and students and to grow into what it is today?
Yeah, to be honest, it wasn't the most, it's, I taught for a really long time. And as you all may know, as teachers, I got really burned out, and I'm a recovering perfectionist, I'll call it that. And as you all know, you can perfect all you want with your lesson plans. It will never be perfect in my mind. And so I just burned out. I felt that the system in schools was not really allowing me to do the original work that I wanted to do. Because there were so many other requirements, as you all know. I saw someone write about all the standards you have to all the things that you need to teach. So I really wanted to step out and try and make a stronger impact. And it was a huge risk. I went into some debt, but I really wanted to work with the community more. I worked with some great Asian American organizations just to understand community issues even more. And so.
Well, thank you so much for sharing that. And again, thank you all for joining us tonight. And my hope is that you all just continue to have great weeks. October is the last, I would say, complete month for the calendar year, and so I hope you all will ride right on into the holidays, and everything will go well for you. And Maria in the chat mentioned ditto with the burnout. So you all keep listening.
I miss the students though. I miss the students so much. So see that as that would keep me in the classroom.
Yes.
I miss them a lot.
Agreed. Students are the light. You go into your classroom and you shut the door.
Yes.
The adults are on the outside. All the admins and central office on the outside. And I'll be honest with you, I don't know that I ever laughed and smiled as much as I did. I was in the classroom. So
I know. I miss that. Yeah, Kath and I sometimes talk about that. Could we go back into teaching?
So good deal. And Angela mentioned she loves her students. They keep me going. Absolutely. Well, for everyone who joined us tonight, again, just again, I consistently express my gratitude because I know that you all have busy, busy lives. You're lesson planning, you're preparing for tomorrow's class, you are making dinners, you are attending soccer games, you're doing a whole lot. So I'll go ahead and finish out now. Continue to follow us at the nationalhumanities.center.org. You can follow us on our social media channels at National Humanities or NHC, at NHC Education as well. Support the humanities education programs. The NHC programs provide a bridge between the academic world and the working classroom. Your gift, no matter how modest, can open up a world of ideas for teachers and rekindle their enthusiasm for the subjects they teach by providing the knowledge and tools that they and their students need to make a difference. As you well know, we are a private nonprofit institution, so we would greatly appreciate that. Next up, October 22nd at 7 p.m. Eastern, we have History Surprising Stories, What Southern Apples Tell Us About the South. Diane Flint, who is founder of Foggy Ridge Cider, also University of North Carolina, affiliated with the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill. She will be here for History Surprising Stories, What Southern Apples Tell Us About the South. It is indeed the fall. We're moving into the fall, and so we scheduled this webinar because we know many of you would enjoy that on multiple levels. We got a taste of the fall here in North Carolina, where we woke up to 40-degree temps today and a high around 60-something, and it's going to drop even lower tomorrow. So join us October 22nd. Again, thank you to my colleague, my friend, my fellow board member, Freda Lynn, for all that she shared tonight. I wish you and your education all the best, and I can't wait to hear more about all the great things you're doing. Everyone, take care, be well. I can't wait to see you all again.
Thanks again, everybody.